Okay. Okay, so I guess we can start now. Okay, welcome everyone to the XA 2020 session on Agile methods and software processes. So as you know, in every session, we have 5 minutes for each speaker or for each presenter to present their paper. And then afterwards, we're going to have a discussion session where we ask questions and clarify some things. So we're going to start first with the first paper, the Agile Success Model, a mixed methods study of a large-scale Agile transformation, authored by Daniel Russo from the Department of Computer Science in Aalborg University in Denmark. So Daniel, if you are ready, you can go ahead and present your paper.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. And I will definitely stay within my 5 minutes. For you today, I only have one slide presentation in order to make it easy and accessible for everyone. Let's see if it's working. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
All right. Good. Now, this work is the result of basically my PhD work, where I started with in-depth investigation in an Italian mission critical organization, developing a command and control system in an agile fashion. Right, so they went from traditional waterfall development into an agile one. In addition to that, after several years of observations, I also performed a quantitative survey, and I was able to validate my model using structural equation modeling. So this is the story of the article in short. On my screen, you can see the theoretical model that I developed during my qualitative investigation, where I was able to identify the external drivers that were specific for the organization that were caused the change, which eventually made the top management of the organization start this process. Now, the top management or first level stakeholder were in direct contact with product owner and Scrum Master, and with second level stakeholders were then on a day-to-day basis exposed to the developers. An important dimension that I identified during my qualitative investigation were both social and technical skills of developers that eventually caused and contributed to the project success. As I mentioned before, with a quantitative investigation, I was able mostly to confirm my theoretical model with one main difference, that apparently there is no semantical difference between social skills and technical skills of developers. So with this small change, you can see on the right the actual validated model with its relations and with the strengths of a relation. With its model, I wanted to show and illustrate what are the key actors during an agile transformations, and how their relations affect eventually project success. Some, I think, relevant aspect of this investigation was that, to my knowledge, this is the first investigation using the Joya methodology as grounded theory approach, which is considered, at least by the management community, new standard process for grounded theory analysis. And also on a similar way, this is among the first paper using structural equation modeling with partial least squares. That is a way to operationalize latent variables through surveys and enables researchers to get and to understand very, very well the dynamics between these different actors involved. There are a number of recommendations that I also have in the paper that I will not show and discuss right now. And I am absolutely happy to answer your questions since my 5 minutes are past.
Okay, great presentation and within time limits. So thank you so much. We'll start with the questions after we finish all the presentations. So Elvan, we have the second paper with Elvan titled Factors Affecting Time Delivery in Large-Scale Agile Software Development. And this paper is co-authored by Erik Grutter, Ari van Dersen, and Georges Gosius. I hope I pronounced the names correctly. Elvan is from Delft University of Technology from the Netherlands. So if you are ready, Elvan, you can start.
Okay, great. Okay, so hi everyone. I am Elvan Kula from the TU Delft. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm here to present our TSE Journal First paper on on-time software delivery in large-scale agile settings. This paper was part of a collaboration between TU Delft and ING. So before I tell you more about the paper, I first want to remind you that late delivery and cost overruns have been common problems in the software industry for decades. So on average, software projects run around 30% over time. And this percentage does not seem to have decreased since the 1980s. So we know that delays are caused by deficiencies in effort estimation during project planning. But then it's especially challenging in the software industry due to the fact that software projects are complex socio-technical systems. So they are affected by a variety of social and technical factors. Well, we know that on-time delivery remains an important topic of interest, as improving it has a large economic benefit for software organizations. It can help companies to reduce delays, to improve customer satisfaction, while also enabling a more efficient resource allocation to reduce delivery costs. To improve on-time software delivery, we need a good understanding of the factors that may influence effort. Previous research has identified a large number of factors, but which factors have the most impact is not clear. So we lack an understanding of the relationships between these factors and how they relate to on-time delivery. Effort estimation is also a major challenge in agile settings. So a particular challenge involves the combination of the flexible, iterative, agile planning setting with the business needs for a long-term planning of larger pieces of functionality that we often refer to as epics. And epics are larger deliveries that can be split into features, which in turn can be split into user stories. And in our paper, we focused on delays at the level of epic deliveries. Well, the overall goal of our paper was to identify the most relevant factors and their interactions that affect schedule deviations in large-scale agile software development. And during our study, we had two research questions. One focused on factor identification, and the other one targeted at factor validation. And identifying, investigating, validating factors can lead to valuable insights on what data and techniques are needed to become more predictable at delivering software. And can also help software organizations to design more effective and efficient strategies for scheduling and risk management. And such knowledge can also guide future research on building, evaluating, improving effort estimation techniques and tools. So to answer our research questions, we performed a mixed methods case study at ING, that's a Dutch bank. And we developed and sent out 2 rounds of surveys to software experts at ING to identify factors and the factor relationships. And then we applied data triangulation. So we analyzed lots of backlog management data and code quality measurements from 185 teams to corroborate the respondents' perceptions. So I'm going to give you a short peek at the results. So from the survey responses, we identified 25 factors that are perceived to affect on-time delivery. A few new factors emerged from the survey, including team familiarity, agile maturity, and organizational factors. And we found that the factors requirements refinement, task dependencies, and organizational alignment, they are perceived to have the greatest impact. Whereas in our analysis of the repository data, we found that proxy measures such as project size, a number of dependencies, developer experience, and historical delivery performance, they can help explain a large degree of the deviations in deliveries. So based on further analysis of the survey data, we extracted direct, indirect, and contributory types of relationships between the factors and on-time software delivery. And we organized our findings in the form of a conceptual framework that is shown here. It captures how the 25 perceived influential factors relate to on-time delivery. And practitioners can use our conceptual framework to identify and manage the risks associated with on-time software delivery. And our results suggest multiple paths of action that can help and may improve the timely delivery of software. And I'm not going to discuss them now, but you can find them in the paper. And based on our findings, we identified several challenging areas that call for further attention. Some of those areas are related to the scalability of agile methods, security concerns, but also dependencies between teams, and also the stability of the organizational environment. And progress in these areas is crucial in order to better understand how we can become more predictable at delivering software. And with that, I would like to conclude my talk.
Thank you so much, Elvan. Really interesting presentation and on time. Okay, so I think now it's my turn to present our paper titled Integrating User Experience into Agile, an experience report on Lean UX and Scrum. You can find all the preprints of all the papers discussed here in the chat. So I'm just going to present my screen right now. Okay. Perfect. Can you see the screen clearly? Okay. Is it clear?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, I'm here to present our paper titled Integrating User Experience into Agile. And this paper is co-authored by my former PhD supervisor, Ana Moreno, from Politécnica de Madrid. So in this paper, we basically report on our experience in redesigning a graduate course on Agile methods. And in that course, we try to integrate user experience with Agile. And this was mainly motivated by what is discussed in the literature about how in the industry there are some initiatives to integrate both disciplines together. And the reasons for that are like multiple reasons, but it's not the time to discuss the motivation of the integration, but we're just reporting on our experience. So what we did is that we focused on Scrum as a framework, as an Agile framework, and we integrated Lean UX tactics and practices within the framework. So the course was composed of 3 parts. We had traditional lectures that covered Agile principles and the Scrum framework, all the practices within that. And then we also had a hands-on exercises on Agile and also on Lean UX. And the third part was the students developing a project following an Agile methodology. But in that case, because we redesigned the course, they needed to follow an Agile plus Lean UX or Scrum plus Lean UX. We delivered the course 2 times, actually 3 times so far, but in the paper we only report on our 2-year experience, one in 2019, and that was in person, and the other one was in 2020, and it was delivered online due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But we didn't notice like a lot of differences. There were some slight differences between delivering in person and online, and it's discussed in the paper. So basically, to do that, to help the students follow an integrated process, we created a framework called GLUX, and this what stands for Gamified Lean UX. And this framework combines a Scrum with Lean UX and gamification. So gamification is here because we added it based on the premise that gamification can improve student engagement and motivation in software engineering education, also in software engineering in general. And this is also discussed in the paper. Chose Lean UX as a UX process to integrate with Scrum because it offers this iterative approach of designing user experience, and Scrum because, well, it's the most adopted Agile framework based on reports in the industry. So the framework is built on top of Scrum, as you can see, and we had some additional activities. So for example, the team starts with brainstorming hypotheses instead of just jumping into user stories and hypotheses. It's like a higher level perspective on the features that we're building in the project. And it focuses on what is the value that we are going to deliver for the user and also for the business. And then after that, the team starts with a design studio where they sketch and design the user stories and hypotheses picked for the current sprint or the multiple sprints. And then in the sprint planning meeting, the team also plans for something called a weekly user experiment. And in this user experiment or weekly user experiment, the teams try to ensure that they have this constant feedback where they experiment with users with the minimum viable product that they have in hand. So these plans are captured in what is called experiment stories, just something to remind the team that there's something that you need to do by the end of the week and to get some feedback from the user. So we collected data using questionnaires, unstructured interviews, and also the analysis of students' project reports. And we mainly found 6 lessons. So the first lesson that we've learned is that integrating UX into Agile can be very difficult when the team has short sprints. And when we say short sprints, in our course, we had only 1 week sprint. And what made this more challenging is that the students or the team of students are only one team of designers and developers together. So they're not separate teams where we have UX practitioners and also software engineers or developers. So it's only one team that does everything together, collaboratively throughout the whole process. The second lesson that we've learned is that learning Agile with Lean UX and also their integration together can be very overwhelming to the students, because our students, not all of them had this prior experience in Agile. So some of them felt that there's a lot to take in this course because we're teaching Agile with Lean UX and also integrating both processes together. The third lesson was that defining a testable tactical hypothesis was one of the most challenging concepts of Lean UX for the students to understand and grasp. And we had a really difficult time getting the students to understand what is a hypothesis and what does it represent. The fourth lesson that we learned is that the high collaboration required by the Lean UX process is very difficult to maintain. So the Lean UX process encourages collaborating on every tactic or on every practice in designing, in experimenting with the users, in building the MVP. be a part of this process or practice. The fifth lesson was that integrating Lean UX into Scrum is an abstract process. And because our students didn't have this prior knowledge in Agile or Lean UX, they thought that the integration or the Lean UX process is abstract, meaning that there isn't a very strict or rigid way to do the integration. And what we did is that we tried to encourage them to be creative and innovative, because we try to remind them that following an Agile process is not rigid and you have to be flexible and adaptable. The sixth lesson was about gamification, and we found that gamification can work, but it was not a straightforward process, because we found some conflicting results regarding some gamification elements, but overall we received positive feedback about the gamification elements that we incorporated into the development process and also in the course. So that concludes my presentation, and let's go back to the session. So we finished all the presentations, so now it's the discussion session. We have some questions here in the chat. I also have some questions written down here. So let's start first with Elvan. You have a question from Ralph. Why should we believe that practitioners' perceptions of the causes of on-time delivery accord with reality? So if you can go and discuss this question.
Yeah. Good question. So I don't think we should always trust these perceptions, but qualitative methods are a good way to capture an extensive overview of all the factors that may lead to delay. So developers can provide valuable insights on these delay causes that cannot be captured in quantitative data only. Plus, it also gives you a good starting point on what and where you have to look in the data. But I'm definitely a fan of mixed methods design, that you also you mix different methods, qualitative and quantitative methods, to perform a validation. And the purpose of our mixed methods design was to indeed capture multiple perspectives on the phenomenon of software delays. And to also validate what people were saying. And so we found that 13 proxy measures that were significant in our regression analysis also overlapped with the 25 perceived influential factors. So there is definitely some overlap with what developers perceive as a delay factor and what we can find in the data. But there are also many other factors that we couldn't quantify in or that ING wasn't collecting. So there's enough to do in that area. Yeah.
Perfect. I'm not sure if Ralph is with us, just to ask him if he has a follow-up question or if he got the answer to his question. Ralph, are you here? Is everything clear? I don't think he's here. So let's go to the second question from Rivera Ortiz, and it's for you, Elvan, again. So she says that very interesting work. What can you suggest to practitioners to improve while estimating a task inside a software development project using the Agile development methodology? Also, second question, what do you suggest to practitioners to improve when estimating software maintenance tasks?
Oh, okay. Yeah, those are very interesting questions indeed. So for the last question on software maintenance, that's not something that we focused on. So the data that we collected was mainly focused on software development, the implementation phase, including the testing and integration phases. But we didn't necessarily ask people about maintenance. Regarding how to improve task estimation, effort estimation. So the conceptual framework that I showed you at the end shows how all the perceived influential factors relate to on-time delivery. And what we found there was that the organizational factors have an impact on the people factors, which in turn have an effect on the technical factors. And the technical factors directly affect delay. So what we can see is that if you have, for example, a stable organizational environment, that would also lead to more skilled and more more stable teams, which in turn actually helps teams to be more effective in solving code quality issues, solving bugs, and that contributes to on-time delivery. So you can find different paths of action that may improve on-time delivery, and those are also the factors that you would have to take into account when estimating a tasks. So some of them are, of course, affect the scope, the effort, but some of them might also cause a deviation in your planning. So, for example, code quality issues might cause a delay in the testing and integration phase at the end of your project. So, I think in the paper we give a very comprehensive overview of the factors that you should take into account when estimating software tasks.
Perfect. Fanny, I hope, okay, she said that perfect. We don't have any questions in the chat, but I do have questions written here for you, Elvan, and also for Danielle. So let's continue with you, Elvan, as long as we're still on the on-time delivery issue. So you discussed also the team dynamics in terms of their knowledge and skills, and I agree with that completely because we saw this in the students' case. I mean, even their students, we saw how the knowledge and skills can actually affect the delivery of their projects. But do you think there are some specific effort estimation techniques that could help them to achieve at least something close to on time? Mm-hmm. Because we know students, they weren't, they don't have this experience, so they didn't know what to do in terms of effort estimation. We tried some techniques, but are there any techniques or practices that you think that are better than others? What do you think?
Yeah, so that's not something that we tackle in the paper, but based on my experience with effort estimation, so what you often see in industry is that teams sit together and they come up with one estimate, for example, in the number of story points for a certain user story, and they leave it at that. And when there's like when an incident occurs or when there's a bug that they didn't take into account and it takes more time than planned, then okay, they postpone the user story to the next sprint, or they send it back to the backlog. But what would help there is to actually make a 3-point estimate. That's also covered in literature. So your worst case estimate, your best case estimate, and what would be the most likely case estimate. And I think it's good to start a team discussion on that. So definitely, if you also have, for example, site reliability engineers in your team, it's also good to discuss, okay, what about the infrastructure this week? Is there maintenance happening? Might that affect our work here? And to take into account, like, hey, maybe we should go for the worst case estimate this time. And if you turn out to have a delay at the end, you do have a new estimate that you can fall back on and that you actually kept in mind. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, love it. Really interesting because estimation is really a very challenging aspect in software development. Are there any questions for Elvan? Because I have a question for Danielle. So if you have any questions from the audience, please just write them in the chat or raise your hand if you want to speak. Okay, so I'll just ask you, Danielle, my question. It's a really interesting topic, I mean, the Agile transformation, because I always think that it's context dependent, the success of these initiatives. And here in Saudi Arabia, we have multiple initiatives to transform some government sectors or even semi-government agencies. And what we see is that in some agencies or in some sectors, it works better than other sectors. And we're not sure what are like the underlying reasons for that. I mean, maybe some sectors have this infrastructure and different culture maybe that influenced their Agile transformation initiative, but we're still struggling with that. In some organization it works, and in some other organization it doesn't work. Even the same strategy is followed because we have this national strategy. And it's interesting to see your perspective on that. So what do you think? I mean, I know that context is influential, but what's your take on this? Like different sectors, do you think they actually influence the success of the Agile transformation or large-scale Agile transformation? And Why?
Well, my take is people, first of all. And the second aspect is, well, what are your external drivers? Now, if I have to think about the organization that I studied, I mean, this transformation happened. It was a very stringent requirement to deploy software in a very short life cycle, or very short compared to here. I mean, it has to be taken into context, but the organization needed software much more quickly and couldn't wait the usual waterfall procurement style that they used to follow, right? So they had this very strong need, which actually made sure that, you know, the top management of the organization was incredibly commitment in providing resources, people, time, and basically from the very early stages to deployment to training of operators on the field.
Okay. Perfect. I have another question. And excuse me if my question seems trivial, but I didn't see anything about user involvement or customer involvement, and what is the role of this aspect in succeeding in agile transformation?
Right. So, well, as typical in Agile and Scrum, the customer is, you know, represented by the product owner.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and the product owner took the role. So if you're asking me how did it work specifically, I mean, it still is a very huge organization. And still today it's a hierarchical organization, and, you know, typically the product owner were on the hierarchical top, which basically means that the product owner was in contact with basically lower layers, right? And since also all the actions that this organization, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to disclose the organization, but basically all the processes, internal processes that they had to underwent are also kind of formalized into technical documentation. And the real challenge was to align the mental model of developers that were not part of the organization, but were basically body rented. And these developers, belonged to a state-owned, let's say, or software organization. And so the development was internal. So all the personnel, management personnel, users were internal of the organization, but the developers per se were basically body rented from this big state corporation.
Perfect. Thank you so much for answering this question. Do we have any other questions from the audience or the presenters? If you have any questions to the other presenters. Okay, let's just give it a few seconds.
But now I actually had a question regarding your study, if you don't,
Yeah, sure.
if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm, if I recall correctly, you mentioned how the class that you ran was for graduate students, right?
Yeah.
So I guess were they already exposed to, like, do they have already experience with the processes? Like, would it be different for, say, like if we ran it for a group of first years, undergrads, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, like if upper year undergrads, like would it be like, in your case, like, how would it differ, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that actually made us or motivated us to create this course is because we saw how first Agile started to deviate from its core principles, people are starting to misuse Agile a little bit, and the focus on users started to, I don't know, it started to go in the shadow. I mean, it's not about the user anymore. It's about sprinting, and it's about other things, and it's about practices. So we wanted to bring the, or start solving the problem from educating our software engineers in the beginning before they go into the industry with this new mindset, or this fresh mindset that we should focus more on the user. We know that we are using Agile, but it should not be the focus, the process, but the focus should be on the user. So I agree with you that if we started this knowledge sharing or this education early before the graduate course, like in undergraduate courses, that would help a lot, because in that case, they would know that there's something called a user experience process, and we can integrate some practices from user experience into the Agile development. The course or the program that we experimented this course with does not include any courses on Agile in the undergraduate. So students are exposed to Agile for the first time in this graduate course. What they teach about Agile is just something very minimal, like a chapter in the software engineering course, but it's not a fully dedicated course for Agile. So this is what we found challenging. Like, most students don't have this knowledge. Some of them have an experience, and that was really interesting to see how experienced students, people who worked part-time jobs or have internships and they practiced Agile before, they were a lot better in the integration and the development process overall. But most of them did not have this experience, so that's why we had these challenges. But still, even with the experienced students who have this prior experience and knowledge in Agile, they still didn't grasp, or they didn't understand or get the idea of Lean UX. Lean UX has these new ideas that it's not in Agile. For example, the hypothesis concept, they didn't really understand, why are we doing the hypothesis? Why do we need it? We have our user stories, we have our epics. Why do we need to create a hypothesis? So we had to remind them every sprint what's the importance of a hypothesis, how to create a testable hypothesis, because they would create a hypothesis, but it's not easily testable. So when they go to experiment with the users, they have this feature or this prototype of feature, and they want to experiment to validate what they assumed is going to work. They face this challenge that, okay, we cannot test this hypothesis because we didn't formulate it very well, or we didn't actually define a very clear business outcome or business objective, and also a very clear user value. So that's the aim of a hypothesis, to bring back the mindset of software engineers to focus more on the value that we're going to deliver to the user, and also the value for the business, because we still have a business to run. So let's focus on both things at the same time. So I hope I answered your question. Is that okay? Perfect. Do we have, yeah.
No, yeah, that was good. Yeah, that's great.
Perfect. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
I have a question for you, Manal.
Sure.
So you said that you used gamification for the course.
Yes.
That's something that we've experimented with before at TU Delft. And I was wondering what your experiences were. What were the benefits, the disadvantages?
Yeah, sure. Well, to be honest, at first, when we wanted to design a gamification strategy to engage the students in this new development process, that will be a little bit heavier than a normal Scrum framework, because they have this extra activities that they would need to do. We went back to the literature and saw other experiences of gamifying software engineering tasks, or gamifying the education of software engineering courses. And we found there were some elements, particular elements in gamification, such as rewards or achievements or challenges, can be more engaging than other gamification elements. And we tried that. We experimented with that. We tried different elements, and we tried to measure which element engaged them more or helped in engaging them more in the development process. And we found that the students enjoyed mostly the achievements board. We had like this board where they post their achievements whenever they, for example, create the hypothesis. They would say, yes, we're done with the hypothesis. And whenever they are done with the experiment, they would say, okay, done with this sprint experiment. So they have this board where they have all their achievements visible for them throughout the sprint or throughout the development process. That was number one. Number two were badges and points or rewards in general. So students had this, so whenever they do something related to Linear X, they would receive points. And if they finish a certain challenge, they would get a certain badge for that challenge. That was also motivating for them. And all of these are based on the perception of the students and also based on the analysis of their project reports. We found that by every sprint, students improved in integrating the two processes together. And we think partially it's because of the gamification and because we had this feedback from them. So it was not very straightforward, to be honest. And we had also two different feedback from the online course and also from the in-person course. I'm not sure exactly why. We're still not sure because we're still investigating this, because next year we're going to start with the fourth round of the course. We're changing some things, we're changing some elements, and we're changing the process a little bit. So we're still investigating this, the why.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. Yeah. I know it's very beneficial.
Because I'm so interested to hear your experience with gamification.
Yeah, we use gamification for some courses at TU Delft. So, for example, for the computer organization course in the bachelor, and there students can, for example, get in lecture points when they like answer a question of the teacher. They can do like extra exercises, lab assignments. So they can actually choose the part of the course that they want to focus on. So if you're a very theoretical person, you could focus on that, do the homework, do the exam. But if you're more applied, you could focus on the lab assignments. So the benefit is that you can attract different kinds of students and have them get them invested in your course. That was the benefit. And the disadvantage is mainly the paperwork. Because you have to report everything for all the components, all the points, rewards.
I remembered something also, the disadvantage of gamification. So sometimes we notice that the students focus more on collecting points and collecting badges more than learning and doing the project. And this is something is reported also in the gamification literature. Like, you have to be careful not to overload your gamified process with lots of gamified elements and gamified tasks, not to lose the focus of the process that you're gamifying this for. And also another thing is that if you tried gamification for a prolonged period of time, people will lose interest over time. We didn't try it for more than 3 months because it's the duration of the semester. But the literature of gamification reports that the prolonged experiences of gamification is not always successful because people get bored of the same gamification elements. So you need to either change your strategy or do something not to lose the interest and the engagement of the people in the process.
Yeah, we've seen the same thing indeed in our courses. Yeah. And I was also thinking, do you think that this gamification strategy would work in industry to teach engineers how Agile works?
Honestly, this is something really controversial. And I remember my my PhD defense, we discussed this. So employees or software engineers in general who are working in companies, they focus more on the monetary rewards more than the just virtual symbolic rewards. But we haven't tried it yet, but we wanted to try how gamification works. And based on other experiences, not our experience, like in the industry, whether gamification actually works, it does in some situations for some teams. So there's these papers about what motivates software engineers, and they found that having a motivating environment can help them achieve better results and be more productive and have a better quality software. But not from our experience, because our experience is only in academic context with students. So it's going to be different. I think it's going to be completely different.
Yeah,
I assume.
definitely.
Well, having worked for the likes of HP, Cisco, Qualcomm, and Nortel, I could offer some. But I've also spent a year as visiting scientist at the SEI, CMU's SEI. So I live at the intersection of companies and universities and even governments. So you're all academics, or more academic than industry practitioners. I'm curious that one of the things we found as industry uh, to get this sort of knowledge transfer was to do something like internships. Internships, either short internships, a month, a couple months, or up to a year. And I'm just curious how that plays into your strategy for education and knowledge transfer, because certainly uh, academics who come and spend a year, a visiting scientist or adjunct professor, or sorry, I'm doing it the wrong way here, on sabbatical. That's the sort of standard way of doing exchange. Have you had much experience with that, and how has it worked for you and your students?
Um, well, if I understood you correctly, you're talking about the industry academic joint collaborations. So in our course, what we try to do something very close to what you're saying. So what we do is we bring practitioners from the industry to talk about the same thing that the students are doing. So for example, in our case, the students were integrating Lean UX or UX with Agile. So we brought these practitioners or industrial people to talk about their experience and to also show the students how is it done in the industry. And it's really fascinating to see how different we are. We're like, they're different worlds. We're doing something and the industry doing something else in most cases, not always, but in most cases. But this is helpful because in the next rounds of the course, we usually improve based on what we learned from those industrial practitioners. So, for example, there was I remember this gentleman from Leroy Merlin. It's a company in Spain. They were integrating Lean UX with Agile. And he told us about an issue or a problem that they're having in the company that we had with the students. So we have the same issues, but our approach is different than industrial context. Our approach is to engage the students with gamification techniques, with grades, with something just to keep them engaged with the process. While in Leroy Merlin or the industry, they have different strategies. So what they do usually is either do some kind of team building exercises to get them to know each other more and to have this shared goal or shared understanding of the whole process. So I think they approach it differently, but we have similar problems with the industry. I hope I'm talking about the same thing you're asking, but
Yeah, well, no. So I guess I could be more specific. I've
sure.
basically, my education was in Canada, where they are places like University of Waterloo have co-op programs, or Sherbrooke have co-op
Yeah.
programs, where
Yeah.
as part of the educational syllabus, the curriculum, you're actually sending the students off for a period of time, anywhere from a month, a few months, a term, several terms. And when they come back, they have very practical experience. Now, it's very difficult to do this as a group, but again, you'll get several students at the same company, and this builds a better knowledge transfer, and leads to the points that most of you have made about being better practitioners, or at least understanding the challenges of industry practice. And we recently had a presentation by Portefeuille from Google in the last session about how knowledge transfer is really about people transfer. So, moving people around and exposing them. And you don't think about that with students. I mean, that's something, if I hadn't taken it personally, internships, I wouldn't have been exposed to industrial practice until I got a job after my PhD, which would have been a long time. Anyhow,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't. I just
No, no,
I just was very
actually,
interested. There was a common theme amongst all of you about
yeah.
how do you get real practice experience. So
Your
thank.
input is really valuable. I think you raised a really important point because co-op programs, I think they exist in most programs. I'm not sure about Politecnica de Madrid, but in my university here in Saudi Arabia, King Saud University, we do have
Yeah.
these co-op programs where we send students at the final semester in their academic journey for a company or sometimes government organization, it doesn't matter, but something where they have like an IT place. So what we have also, there's some challenges to that because when we send our interns or when we send our students to these companies or to these agencies, we notice that they don't involve our interns into the hardcore processes and the hardcore work of the company. We notice that they give them like these side tasks
Well,
or
so I have a point
something.
about that. I have a point
Yeah,
about that. If you're only there for a couple weeks or a month, and I'm familiar with that, where the student is really a friend, through friends and family of the company, then they're
yeah,
not going to get a full blown experience. The company is more interested in how do we expose them a bit, but let's not put them on a critical project. But if you are on
of
an
course.
internship where the internship is 4 months, or better yet, a year, sort of more like an
Yeah.
apprenticeship, which is the
Mhm.
model in Europe more than here in North America or elsewhere in the world, from what I understand. Uh,
Yeah.
they can get involved in a very mission critical project and make a real contribution. But it's very hard to do that as if your exchange is only a matter of weeks or a matter of months. You find out where the washroom is, where the cafeteria is,
Yeah.
how to access various software libraries, etc. But at the end of the day, you're just getting up to speed by the time your term is over. So anyhow,
Yeah.
and over my shoulder here, I have something that reminds me of the arrogance of engineering.
What
You
is it?
probably can't. It's the Titanic. The
Oh, okay.
Titanic, which unsinkable. Well, they never really said it was unsinkable, but they thought it was unsinkable. But didn't pay attention to ice cubes and with fatal consequences. So I always like to remind myself, this is the greatest, newest, shiny technology, but you have to be aware that there are definitely limitations on
Yeah.
how it can be applied. And by the way, I've reached out to all of you on LinkedIn just to connect because I'd like to continue the conversation. And sorry,
Sure.
we're babbling on at great length here.
No, thank
Have
you
a
so much.
wonderful afternoon, evening, or morning, as the case might be. I'm here in California, and I think we share time zones with some of you, but not many of you are. It's late in the day for you.
Yeah, it's actually it's at 9 p.m. or 9 at night here in Saudi Arabia. And I think it's very
Yeah.
similar to all of you, but except for Zay. Zay, he's in Canada, so I think he's in
Well,
the
he's in
science
British
time
Columbia,
zone.
which is the same time zone as me.
Yeah,
So
it's the
Yeah.
it's the same time
two of
zone.
two of us are on the Pacific Coast, where it's coming up on 11 o'clock in the morning. And this is one of the challenges I think that we all face. I mean, I really enjoy ICSI virtual because I've been to ICSI. My first ICSI was, I hate to say this, many moons ago in the last century, and you
Mm.
had to travel somewhere, so it would take you 2 days to get there, 2 days to come home, and getting up at odd hours to participate in sessions, I think is really useful. And I have words on that, but it's another story for another day.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your discussion. I mean, it's really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed your input, and I hope that we can continue on this discussion because it's
Oh,
really
absolutely,
interesting.
and happy to chat with you. I've connected via link, or I've invited you via LinkedIn, but email or even Skype or whatever. But there are
Absolutely.
many interesting facets to the points you've raised, and I think, was it Elvan, sorry.
Elvan.
Agile has lost its way, which is an interesting observation.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm running a panel actually at XP, which is coming up in Copenhagen. I believe, Danielle, are you at the IT University? So Maria and Hubert Baumeister and a number of the people there. It's he's at Copenhagen TU actually, I guess. But you know, the question is
I
how we.
am in Copenhagen and I will attend XP.
So you know more than I'm saying. But the point is that how is Agile evolving in hybrid world? I mean, remember 20 years ago when Kent Beck was talking about XP, it was more about you have to have face-to-face interaction. You have to be focused on the customer, no rocket projects, you know, don't have so much complexity. You know, you have to be able to put your hand around the problem. So, I just thought there were some very interesting points that were being raised by all of you.
Thank you.
And thank you for your presentations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Stephen.
Stephen.
I'll say goodbye because we're almost at time, and I have to run to my next meeting, which I can do, but just by hitting leave and join the next meeting.
Yeah, wait, 2 seconds.
Have a great day, all of you. Great evening.
You
Bye bye.
too. Thank you. Bye. Ilvan, before we end the session, we still have a question for you if you want to answer it. It's from Sami. He says, how can you come up with fair grading system if you are so flexible on the tasks and assignments?
Yeah, this is regarding the gamification strategy that we used at one of the courses. Yeah, so we looked at the amount of workloads each task would take. So how much time the lab assignments would take versus the homework versus studying for the exam, and based on that, we also did the division of the study points, let's say, and everyone has this, the same chance to do all of the tasks. So in that way, it is fair. Yeah, but in principle, it's easier to pass the course then, because you have so many opportunities to collect points.
Well, thank you so much for your answer. If we don't have any questions, we can conclude this session. We still have 5 minutes if anyone has any question or comment. Okay, it seems that no one has any question. So thank you so much, dear authors and presenters. And thank you so much, Zay, for helping out. I really enjoyed this session. It was so more interesting than I expected. And it was nice to meet all of you and see your faces or put a face to the name. And thank you so much for all your efforts. And I hope I can see you soon in the future. In person. Yeah, let's hope so. Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Manal, for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you, Elvan.
Very nice session.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Zay. And have a good evening. Have a good afternoon for Zay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much.
You too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.